Let me make clear at first, I'm not the author of the book. I have contributed one chapter out of, I think, about 20 of them. Many of the other chapters are better than mine. So I will sort of limit my ownership, but not my praise. I want to, in a sense, share with you why this book was written. What happened about a year ago, some of us were talking, and the sense was that Prime Minister Modi actually was approaching a very interesting anniversary of being 20 continuous years in government, in a democratic polity, as a leader of her administration. Obviously, 8 of those years were as Prime Minister, and the rest of them were as Chief Minister. And if you look at democratic politics, because these, the nature of politics, there's a very high turnover rate, there aren't too many people who would have continuously been in politics, in electoral politics, which means you have to win an election every 4 years at the very least. So the sense was that it's an occasion to reflect on what he's done, and to do that really from a sort of a 360 perspective, by getting a very broad, very diverse set of people to pen their impressions about the Prime Minister. So those of you who would get the book will probably be a little surprised to see actually the very few of us from the government in that list of authors. In fact, I think there are only 3 of us, the Home Minister, the National Security Advisor, and myself. Most of the other authors are people, there are sports people, there are business people, there are people from tech people. So it's a very broad selection. What I'd like to do, I picked 4 passages. Only one of them is mine. One is of Sudha Murthy. Many of you would be familiar with her. She's an entrepreneur. She's someone very active in the literary world as well. One is a great sports star, P.V. Sindhu, who's really transformed the game of badminton. In a way, they reinforce each other, but each one is a little bit different because the perspectives are different. So the first one is from my own, and I picked it for this reason, because it's the passage which refers to the Madison Square Garden, and really how that came about in a way. So let me start. That the evolution of our diaspora policy bears similar hallmarks of core beliefs and strong care. I had earlier written about, the various operations we have done to bring back people. It is now widely accepted that the Madison Square Garden event of 28 September 2014 was a watershed in that domain. Prime Minister Modi had been invited to come to the US by President Obama during a congratulatory phone call. My first call on him thereafter, as the ambassador in the US, naturally focused on a possible visit. The PM brought up the subject of the diaspora, which he described as a great strength of the nation. They needed to discover their own voice, and we needed to consolidate their role as a bridge. The instructions for the MSG event flowed from this belief. It must be organized in a manner that its sound would reverberate not just in the US and India, but across the world. That it certainly did, for most part because of the intensity of the PM's connect to the audience was so manifest. Thus began a unique experiment in popular diplomacy that has been the envy of many other leaders and countries. Equally, it has boosted the pride of the diaspora wherever he spoke. Now, the MSG, of course, was the first of its kind. It then moved to Australia. I had the honor of organizing one in London, in Wembley. And, to do it in the Wembley Stadium was, I cannot even describe the feeling to you. And in many ways, even today, the practice continues. We just, a few months ago, did one in Denmark. I must tell you, the Prime Minister of Denmark, she came on the stage along with the Prime Minister. And her first name is Mette. So first you had this entire, crowd there with that Modi, and then she came on and became Mette. And she said, couldn't have even imagined something like this. I mean, in her mind, it was like a rock concert, a political rally, it was everything rolled in one. And so when we actually did the Nordic summit, a large part of the summit was her describing to the other Nordic prime ministers what this particular experience was like. So let me switch to a very different paragraph. And this is a paragraph by P.V. Sindhu, who's our premier badminton player. And I read from this chapter, which he writes, saying, as I began writing this chapter, the question that struck me was this. Why is that so? Why is that so? The preceding paragraph, she raises the question that Prime Minister Modi is among the very few undisputed youth icons of India. So she's asking the question, why is he a youth icon? After all, if we go by the conventional wisdom about who can be a youth icon, then Prime Minister Modi defies the entirety of that wisdom. He is not young. He does not come from the domain of sports or cinema or popular culture or other such fields conventionally associated with youth attraction. In fact, politics, the lifelong activity that Modi has chosen as his service, is rarely associated with youth icons, at least in more recent history. And yet, he has now for almost 2 decades enthused the youth in our country, first in Gujarat and then the entirety of India, and he continues to do so. So I mulled over this question for many days, but the answer eluded me. While I thought and researched, one of Modi's quotes continued to reverberate in my mind. Speaking from the ramparts of the Red Fort on Independence Day in 2017, the Prime Minister had said, we have to leave this chalta hai attitude. We have to think of badal sakta hai. This attitude will help us as a nation. Eventually, I changed the way I was approaching the question, and then the answer seemed so natural. What is that one defining character that we most associate youth with? Age, certainly, but that is biological and not necessarily a characteristic or attitudinal quality. If I were to identify the one quality, the one attitude that most defines youth, it would be fire in the belly and the audacity to change the situation rather than compromise with it. How will this not happen? Hoga kaise nahi? That is the preeminent characteristic of a young person. It makes them push the boundaries, dream the impossible, make it happen, and that is Modi. So, now let's see what Mr. Anupam Kher has to say. And his chapter is actually titled, Modi, the man India trusts in a crisis. So, these are his words now. Unlike many predecessors who became passive during a crisis, Modi always steps up, takes charge, and fulfills his duty. This is critical as active leadership is vital for countries to emerge from a crisis situation. In a country where people are used to politicians going below the radar when something goes wrong, Modi is an exception. He has never shied away from taking the responsibility of leading Gujarat and India out of a critical situation. An excellent example of this was Modi's conduct at ISRO in September 2019 when Chandrayaan's 2 Vikram lander lost communication. Realizing that the hard-working ISRO team was extremely demoralized, Modi decided to stay back in Bengaluru and return to the ISRO center the next day. He spoke to the project team and encouraged them to forget the failure and take pride in their achievements. Embracing an emotional ISRO chief, Keshavan, to console him remains one of the most iconic moments from Modi's 20 years of governance. Modi's gesture and raw emotions visible in that image reflected his leadership. He was fulfilling his promise by being present, both in good times and in bad times. This sense of responsibility automatically creates a belief in the minds of citizens across the country. Come what may, Modi will be there for us. And, when I was flagging this paragraph for my own reference, I was actually reminded of an experience I had when I was Foreign Secretary. It was quite common for me to return from some trip fairly late at night and then sit clearing your stuff so that your desk is clean the next day. And I still remember one day, it was around past midnight, and our consulate in Mazar-e-Sharif in Afghanistan was under attack. And we were using the phones, trying to figure out what happened. So this was Afghanistan of that era. So you had to kind of get a friendly warlord who would go in and help your people. So all of this was happening. You're juggling 4 phones, talking to everybody, keeping the courage up at that end. And the phone rang. My phone rang. And normally, when the Prime Minister calls, you get a no caller ID. Okay. So it sort of took me a bit by surprise. And but even on the no caller ID, usually somebody connects you. Okay. So this time it was the Prime Minister. Okay. And obviously I said, "Ha, sir, it's 12:30. What else could I be doing other than being awake?" Because in his life, that is probably natural. He said, "Acha, TV dekh rahe ho?" I said, "Ha, sir, TV dekh rahe hain." "To kya ho raha hai wahan?" So, because he assumed that's exactly what I'd be doing. I said, "Nahi, sir, wo abhi attack chal raha hai, but the help is on its way, etc." So, exchange. So then he said, "अच्छा, जब खत्म हो जाएगा मुझे फ़ोन कर लेना." So I said, "सर, इसमें 2-3 घंटे और लगेंगे, तो जब हो जाएगा मैं आपके यहाँ बता दूंगा." So there was a pause. He said, "मुझे फ़ोन कर देना." Okay. And I say this to you because that sense today, that sense for people who work in the government, people who are in public life, who are in political life, and I would say today people in the country. The way he put it, good times or bad times, he's there. And politicians are always there in good times. Okay. So that's in many ways really the difference. The fact that when things are difficult, and we saw that during COVID. We saw that during COVID. There were many, if you look around the world, how leaders handled COVID. Not everybody stepped up, not everybody said, "I will take that difficult call, it is my call." And to handle the consequences of very big decisions, which at that time you took, with the enormous risk of what was being decided. That is really an extremely, I would say, singular quality. and which then brings me to my fourth and last paragraph, which I read to you from four very different domains. And in that sense, each one of us is giving you a perspective, as I said, in many ways a reinforcing perspective, but a different one as well. So here's what Sudhamurthy has to say. Gone are the days when people sent their children abroad with tears in their eyes, knowing that the children will settle there and not return to India due to financial constraints. Today, many people choose to return with a positive change in the environment back home. Some even come back with the greatest of intentions to keep the progress growing. Now, Indians are no longer considered secondary to anyone at a global level. The younger generation is confident and ready to face all countries in various competitions, including cricket, but also in athletics and so much more. We aim for the best. This is possible only when there is a true leader like Modi, who is as deeply rooted as a banyan tree, a big tree with a big personality. Every part of the tree is useful to others, much like our Prime Minister. Every project is useful to us. The animals can eat the leaves, the birds can make the nests, people can take fruits, bees, and humans can both enjoy the honey and the aroma of flowers, and the branches can be cut for wood to create a shelter for the needy. But there a good leader stands, tall and all alone, without any benefit for himself or herself. These are the leaders entrenched in ground reality with the aim to transform the destiny of the country and the people. So I cannot find a better way of ending this book. I think this came straight from her heart. I think it touches many of ours. Once again, as I said, I really thank you all for the opportunity today to share parts of a book which means a lot to many of us. And I'd be very happy to sit down and converse about the book and anything else with all of you. Thank you.
I read the book with great interest. I must say that it is an extraordinary book on many counts. It takes the reader to a discovery of a new India. And as you get deeper into it, you realize it's not a discovery, it's a revelation. You move away from headlines to core, deep lines, and then the picture begins to emerge. It's not even a transformation of India. It's a metamorphosis, literally moving from a larva into a beautiful butterfly. And this metamorphosis is described by these 21 extraordinary authors who, in their selection, signal something interesting, that the story of New India will be told by the doers, the shapers, the great contributors. I want to start off, Dr. Jaishankar, with the first thing that struck me in this story. In this country, President Roosevelt has gone down in history as the architect of the New Deal, which restored security and welfare back to all Americans. But as one looks at Prime Minister Modi's leadership and the incredible technology Indrajal, it seems that the safety net that has been put in place is unprecedented in the history of the human race. And in terms of poverty alleviation, in terms of giving confidence to the people that they can trust their prime minister in a crisis, that their basic needs will be met. As the Rig Veda says, God did not create human beings so that they would die of hunger. And I think he has fulfilled that Rig Vedic promise. I'm curious, how do you see his leadership in establishing that safety net, the New Deal for all Indians, but especially the poorer section of society.
I'm very glad you asked me the question, and I must tell the rest of the audience we didn't fix this question. Okay, and I'll tell you why I'm very pleased you asked me this question, because I today, as a political person, travel around a lot internally in India, and I travel a lot in India because unless you actually go to a small towns and villages and beyond uh, the normal comfortable zones that people like us usually traverse, it's very difficult to capture the change which is happening on the ground. And if you do not capture that change which is happening on the ground, you actually have no sense. You can't really understand the politics of India. And I say this well, but it gave me a lot of chance to travel around. And from time to time, I would meet the Prime Minister, and we would have this somewhat repetitive conversation, like a bit like Groundhog Day, which was I would come back and say, "Sir, I went there, and wahan to lagta hai ki everybody is for you." Then I come back to Delhi, but they said that you won't get more than 200 seats. Huh? Now I am like, sort of, am I being carried away when I go out, or are people misreading it in Delhi? Are they willfully misreading it? Is it propaganda? Um, at some stage, I think I kind of may have annoyed him enough to say that at some stage he said, "Nahi, 300 seat milenge," sort of get 300 seats. You know, don't doubt it. But from that time, it struck me how much political analysts in India, especially because it's very Delhi centric, and political analysts, frankly, in other parts of the world, including this city, how much they are actually out of touch with the reality of India. And a big part of that reality is exactly what you have put your finger in, which was the change on the ground. Now, that change on the ground had started surfacing already by 2019. Maybe people like us didn't pick it up from big cities. I think the people in rural areas and small towns did pick it up. I mean, they sensed that something, they could already see, uh, I discovered later after the elections, you know, health workers where their attendance went up, the quality of primary health centers went up. Uh, People began to pay more attention to education. But today, if I were to give you numbers, when you spoke about Roosevelt, let me throw some numbers out at you, because I suspect even to all of you with all your interest in India, these numbers would come to you as a surprise. When COVID happened, one of the first meetings we did as we were going into the lockdown, Prime Minister told the cabinet members saying, "Look, all of you, please read up about what happened during the Spanish flu. More people died of hunger than they died of the flu. And on my watch, I'm not going to let people die of hunger." Okay. So what we did then was to approve um, free food to with a certain cutoff point, you can say, for people who were really, you can say, needy, deserving, distressed at that point of time. So this was rice or wheat, and some other things which you need as your daily pulses, as your daily requirement. And through the entire COVID period, till now, 800 million people regularly get food support from the government.
That's
Okay.
amazing.
Now, it wasn't only the food. There are people, there was a lockdown. Even when the lockdown was lifted, there were people whose casual employees, the informal sectors. So it was also decided that they would be directly paid into the bank accounts. Enough that it takes care of their very, very basic requirements. Now, 415 million people today get money into the bank accounts. It started during COVID, it is still continuing. So when, when there were people who looked at what was happening in India, made all sorts of predictions, political predictions, they didn't realize that, that bit which I read out to you, for the people of India, the 800 million people of India who got food and the 400 million people of India who are getting money in the bank accounts, Modi was for them in good times and bad. Now, these were, I would say, emergency or crisis responses. But you got to understand today the change which is happening in India. And I'll give you again a few examples of that change. There's a big push for home ownership. Okay. Already during this period, there's a rural scheme and an urban scheme. Between them, close to about 25 million homes have been built and given to people. Now, if you take roughly, the average Indian family size is 4.8. So actually something like about 115 million people, I mean, that's the size of Japan, have actually benefited from home ownership during his period. When he became prime minister, a very large number of houses were not connected to electricity. So there's actually a scheme. The home was Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana. The scheme was a scheme called Saubhagya. Now, if you look again at the number of people, that is houses multiplied by 4.8, something like about 130 million people have actually got electricity connections in this period. If you look today at health, because there is a Jan Arogya Yojana which actually gives you health insurance and health access at affordable rates. You're again talking, multiple hundreds of millions. So if I go back to 2014, which was not that long time ago, the idea that a country like India at a $2,000 per capita level could construct a social security system was a fantasy. Today, you can actually see that happening right in front of your eyes. I'm not minimizing the problem. I mean, we're still doing very basic things, but at least the basic things are happening, and for the person who's benefiting, the basic things are revolutionary things. But you look at this, what is a big program right now called Har Ghar Jal, that is water to every house, okay, which is piped water connections. Finally about something like 450 million people are going to benefit from this program. So if you can do programs on the scale, even on the very famous one which you may have heard, Ujjwala, where you replace the firewood with cooking gas. Yes. The beneficiaries of Ujjwala are the size of the population of Germany, 80 million people. So look at the scale of what is happening today. And that, in many ways, to me, all this has happened because you had a prime minister who saw the promise of technology, who created a digital backbone. We could put money into people's bank accounts because they had bank accounts. Now they had bank accounts because Prime Minister Modi got after them in his first term and said, please have bank accounts, and banks, please allow people to even open accounts without a deposit. So the bank accounts, he foresaw what it meant to have a bank account. So Today, it is financial inclusion. I mean, you look at the loan schemes we do, Mudra. There's a scheme called Swanidhi for people who are vendors. So it could be the informal sector, it could be entrepreneurs, it could be small business people, it could be electricity and water in your house, it could be insurance. This is a social security system which is in the making. And it is in the making at an amazing speed, enormous scale, and I would say at a cost effectiveness, which really is a business model in itself.
I I have to say, this answer gives you just a small taste of stuff that would be unimaginable when you read this book. I mean, these are in the category of miracles. And Ujwala, that honorable minister talked about, 500,000 women would die of burning when they would be working with firewood. I mean, this is extraordinary. Let me move to my second question. Uday Kotak, in his write-up in the book, is very blunt. He says, Modi has taken a non-performing nation and converted it into a performing nation. Prime Minister Modi himself says, I am the Pradhan Sevak. Measure me by my report card. And by his report card, today India is the fastest growing economy in the world. And Arvind Panagriya, in the book, boldly states that in less than 20 years, India could shoot for a per capita of 8,000, 4 times the number you mentioned, become amongst the top 3 global powers. But what I found fascinating in the book, I love Sudha Murthy's metaphor of the banyan tree. Amish Tripathi refers to Prime Minister Modi's as Bhagirath Prayas. But it's the common person who nailed it. He describes Prime Minister Modi as the dream weaver, the person who has given an average Indian the chance to dream of a better future. That's a supreme gift, to give hope for a better future. So my question is in 2 parts, Dr. Jaishankar. First, has Prime Minister Modi firmly embedded in the Indian psyche, we will create wealth, that wealth creators are honorable, that it's not morally superior to be socialistic, wealth creation is moral. And number 2, as India emerges to become one of the top 3 global powers, are we allocating enough resources to manage externally the change management process? Because that's a very delicate process to get the world to accept your rise.
I would say the answer to the first question is a yes. The answer to the second question is still working at it. Okay? I'll tell you why the first one is a yes. I mean, those of you who would have followed him, and that there are times he's spoken about it in public platforms, he's spoken about it in parliament, where he's actually sent this message that the idea that the government, the bureaucracy needs to control everything, we need to get out of that thinking. And he has tried in many ways to, and I think you used the word wealth creator. I would actually even go to the extent of using the word, to me, employment creator. Because at the end of the day, if our businesses prosper, the businesses create employment. So finally, the beneficiary of this at the end of the day is actually people in the society who get a job. He's pushed actually quite strongly for greater entrepreneurship. I mean, you look today at schemes like the production-linked incentives, the fact that today there is a revival of manufacturing in our country. You know, we had previous governments had pretty much, they had dampened manufacturing sentiment. They made land acquisition difficult. They made labor laws very onerous. I mean, they did everything, frankly, to prevent India becoming a manufacturing power, and then said, our strength is in services. you know that was actually a cop out. That was a way of excusing your inability to perform in a particular sector. Now, a country economy like India cannot not be a manufacturing power. you know if you look today at the encouragement we uh, see for manufacturing in India, the support given to businesses for employment, the support given to small and medium industries, the idea actually of creating supply chains in India, because you know, Prime Minister does believe that it's great to trade with the world, to be linked with the global economy, but your supply chains cannot be entirely be abroad. I mean, a country like India needs those deep strengths. It needs a multi-layered economy. Growth must be reflected not just in growth of profits and market capitalization, but growth in employment as well. So he is pushed for that, I would say, very strongly. He's also pushed, interestingly, for he's imagined the next generation's view of it, which is more startups, more innovation, more self-employment, employment not just of tech people, but even, as I said, we have this scheme which is even informal employment of someone who's sort of doing small jobs, but give them the ability to own their businesses and be financed better than they were. So certainly, I would say there is a shift in messaging, in policy, in even in by now, after 8 years, even on the ground, in supporting greater business, in supporting greater employment creation, supporting that spirit of innovation. All of that is coming through very strongly. Now, your second question: how does it message outside? You know, my sense of this, and it sometimes goes against the grain of my own previous profession. I don't think all these necessarily are best done by the government, through government people. That's not India. Uh, we have to evolve a manner of communication and messaging that is unique to us, which is best suited to us. We enjoy this incredible advantage of having 30 plus million people of Indian origin or who are Indians abroad. The fact that we genuinely have a civil society, businesses which have links across, we have more than 1 million students studying abroad, all of them actually help to message the rise of India. So when you said, are you giving enough resources for it? In a literal sense, if you would say, is the foreign service or embassies growing at 8% along with the economy? Some years yes, some years no. Yes, during Prime Minister Modi's tenure, we have added another 25 embassies in different parts of the world. But to my mind, that's not the only, or sometimes even the best, necessarily the best way of communication. Our image in this country, and all of you are witness to it. Our image of this country has changed because we have a living bridge of the community, which is what the American people and the American public and American politicians think of when they think of India. So, to my mind, the diaspora focus that he has, the student focus that he has, is incredibly focused on, what happens to our students. I mean, we push very, very aggressively in countries for working opportunities for our students. So he does realize, I mean, there is a whole menu out there about what can determine India's image abroad. We are one, the foreign ministry and embassies are part of it, a very important part of it. But I would argue that there's much to it than does.
I want to move on to what I call democratization of democracy. When you read this book, it's breathtaking in terms of how Prime Minister Modi has brought into the political system inclusivity of Indians that didn't even exist in the consciousness. And so you're almost left with a feeling of wonder, like, where did he find the President of India? Where did he find her? And this inclusivity, this democratization and democracy of India is an untold story because it is in striking contrast to other countries where actually power is becoming more concentrated, not as shared as you see in the representatives in Indian Parliament. What is your observation on the inclusivity that is now being reflected in Indian democracy?
Oh, I think you're spot on. I mean, if you ask me, the two most inclusive examples, proof that democracy has really deepened, it really works. To me, one is Indian politics, the other is the Indian cricket team. I mean, no, there's not a facetious observation, because just, I sometimes look at the parliament, I look at the cabinet, I look at people in politics, I also look at the TV and look at the cricket team. And you ask yourself, compare these people to where it was 20 years ago. So maybe even 10 years ago, 30 years ago. How much narrower was our political class? And by the way, it's no judgment. I mean, they were very talented people. Many of them did splendid things. I mean, I'm not in any way, doubting that. I'm making a basic observation that if you look today at the origins of people in politics, if you take even the Parliament of India as a representative sample and say, okay, which towns are they from, where did they study, what was their background, what language are they most comfortable in, what are their social habits, it's very, very different. I mean, my point was that applies to the Indian cricket team as well. But it's interesting here. I mean, you suggested in a way that Modi brought about the change. I would actually say Modi himself is a product of that change. That the fact that someone like him eventually has become Prime Minister of India itself shows how much the country has changed. So sometimes, you have these, I read these debates about how is democracy doing around the world, and different people give labels to countries of their choice. This is a country where, look at the number of people who go to vote, it's continuously rising. Look at the number of women who are voting, that's rising even faster. Look at the integrity of the democratic processes, the fact that, I mean, it's a country where elections are respected. I mean, people win, people lose, nobody challenges the process. No, I'm only speaking about India. Please do not read anything more into it. So my point is, I think we have a great deal to be proud of. Now, the results we throw up may not suit everybody. So there would be people who, as part of politics, will give it a twist and call it things. But I really think, when you go around the world, and I do sometimes get these debates in other societies. So are you optimistic about your politics? So where do you think your society is going? I think Indians are actually, Indians are optimistic and frankly have a very good reason to be optimistic.
I'll take one question from the audience. On a personal note, I was the first Indian to come to the US over 50 years ago and make solar cells for NASA's space program. And I mean, it's mind-blowing to me that Prime Minister Modi would conceive of this idea of, one grid where nations that have sunlight and are generating.
One sun, one world, one grid.
Yeah. I mean, this is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam at its highest level, sharing the world as a family. One of the exciting revelations in the book is that India now, the intellectual property of India is scaling at 4 times every 5 years when you look at patents and trademarks. The head of McKinsey has mentioned that 20% of the global talent will now come from India. And Dharti Desai asked the question, 300 million children, how do we make that investment so that their future is secure? And obviously education is the key to that. Your thoughts on that? I wanted to get at least one question from a woman, and Dharti Desai's question will end the meeting.
I'll keep the answer short and maybe we can take a few more.
Oh, okay, good.
So,
I can,
there's a very deep sense in the government, reflected particularly in the Prime Minister's own thinking, but I think widely shared within the government as well, that we have not invested in our education processes the way we should have. If you look at where we started off, first of all, the literacy process itself took a fair amount of time to reach higher levels. School joining numbers were weak. School retention numbers also very challenging, especially for girls. So the whole idea of, at a very basic level, who is literate, how many people join school, how many people finish school, what happens to them after that, what's your secondary system, what's your tertiary system, did they grow in the numbers, which they should have during this period. And if we compare ourselves, especially to some of the other Asian countries, you can see they invested much more in education and skills than we do. So I think today that corrective, that first of all, that awareness is there. Then that awareness, that policy is there from that awareness. And today I think if you see the number of medical schools, the number of engineering schools, the skills institutes which are being done, the idea of actually reforming there's a new education policy. And in each of these, actually, the Prime Minister himself spends an enormous amount of time. So education ranks very, very, very high in priority. And I think like everything else, it will take time to kick in. I would fairly confidently predict that you will see the unfolding of that change thinking as we've seen it, for example, in the digital arena. But I absolutely agree with the questioner that we must invest in education, and I think that's very much the Prime Minister's view.
So, away, and we very much wanted you to come.
I came for this book, though.
I know you did. But this question sort of refers to that. And there are several questions here. What was your first meeting with Mr. Modi? Live from a diplomat to a politician being under Prime Minister Modi, because in a sense, he was your mentor. So a little bit of that personal connection, people want to hear about that.
I'm, usually a little cautious talking on that set of subjects, but I will say this. I actually first met him, and I mentioned it, by the way, in this book,
Yep.
when I was ambassador in China. And he came, he was Chief Minister of Gujarat. He had come on a visit. He had come with an investment business team as well. And quite honestly, we had a lot during that period. I was 4.5 years in China. We had a lot of people who came, a lot of chief ministers who came. And no question, he stood out. He stood out. I mean, I frankly liked Mr. Modi before I met Mr. Modi, because I'm a kind of on certain matters, at least as people who worked with me would testify, possibly complain. I'm a micromanager. I like to go into details. I do my diligence. So I can be quite a pain when in my professional life. Okay, I'm a nice guy outside. But I found someone who, I mean, the level of preparation which was done actually set him apart. And often the frustrations of being in an embassy is you deal with people who come unprepared. They don't even respond to what you have said. Instead, here we were, he came in with even a visiting card where he had got his name transcribed in a manner in which they understood the program. And the program was, at that time it was very novel to me. Now I know it's an SOP, which is you start 7:30 in the morning with a breakfast, and then you carry on till you drop, because he doesn't. So the and it was frankly for me a revelation. It was something very novel, because as in a sense Hindu associate politicians with, and the interesting thing was, I guess I must have made a good impression. But he did say one thing to me at the end of it all. One, of course, I write about it here. He wanted a political briefing, which normally chief ministers are not bothered about that. But he gave me a very good reason. He said, look, I'm abroad. From a different political party, but I do not want to say something which is even a millimeter different from what is my national policy. So I want you to walk me through, through and China is a very tricky relationship. The other bit which was different was he wanted to know, okay, what should I say? He said also, please tell me what should I not say. Okay. And I saw that during the course of the meeting, he would kind of half turn, and there would be that quick look, which is like sort of, is there some, is there feedback? By the way, feedback is his favorite term. So after every meeting, he would want a feedback. How did it go? What did I do right? Did I get the tone right? Did I get the substance right? So it was for me, frankly, even at that time, a visit which stood out in my tenure. And obviously, the next time I actually met him was when he had become Prime Minister, and by that time I was here as ambassador. So I obviously followed the campaign, etc., with interest. So for me, it's not like we had some huge prior personal connect. I mean, it's someone I have known really for about 10 years, but who, as I said, is very really exceptional in his working habits, in his commitment, in his desire. I mean, that fire in the belly to change the country was very visible. And of course, the next similar set of experiences we had in Washington, on that famous visit, and I have another witness to it sitting here in the form of ambassador. I think many of you were involved in it as well at that time. So that kind of, scheduling, the meeting, the curiosity, the desire to know, to improve, All of that was there. So now, when such a person tells you that, I think you need to be a minister, join politics, how can you say no?
I agree. I'll ask Suman Golamudi, our executive director, to come, but very quickly while she's coming, a couple of suggestions, Minister. One is Mr. Mohan Vanchu would like to extend an invitation. If you have 5 minutes on Saturday evening after your talk at the UN, please drop in at the Shankara I Gala dinner. It's the first time Shankara I Foundation is doing it. Mohan Vanchu would like to invite you. It's a very noble cause. Dr. Sudhir Parekh would like to say that the NRIs who Honorable Prime Minister has recognized have potential to do so much more, and perhaps the diaspora can find some voice within the system in a formal way. We'll pass on these suggestions through our beloved Consul General Randeep Jaiswal for the ministry to look at these suggestions. But I have to end with one last comment that picks up on what Honorable Minister said. Everybody who has met Prime Minister Modi talks about his energy, talks about his memory, talks about his attention to detail. But in his fascinating write-up, Sadhguru talks about Prime Minister Modi's kinetic energy. It's not the energy that he has, it's the energy that he creates. That on any initiative, his kinetic energy is able to create mass mobilization. He is extraordinary. After Mahatma Gandhi, he is the first Indian leader that has been able to create that national will, that national self-belief, that national consciousness that leads to this incredible energy that you see in whatever he does. And so, he's really a gifted leader, and it's because of that that we wanted to organize this literary event, because we felt that all of you who are thought leaders, you should read this book. And Minister, we'd love you to come back to IAC so that we can continue thoughtful conversations.